Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Dylan.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Um, all right, so I guess we could first just introduce ourselves. So if you want to go first.
Okay. Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm a junior in Northwest Indiana, Chicago metropolitan area. I go to Munster High School.
Cool. Hi, I'm Dylan Swickle. I'm from Jericho, Long Island, New York, and I go to Jericho High School. I'm actually a senior and I'm graduating at the end of the year, and I'll be attending the Washington University of St. Louis in the fall. Um, Today we're going to be talking about the coronavirus, COVID-19, and what we think is going to be of the future of this virus. Um, Cynthia, if you want to start off.
Well, I think before we get started, just a little bit of background information about both of us. In the summer of 2019, both of us attended the AMP Global Scholar Program in DC. And just an important note, if you find this interesting, this is a subject that you're more interested in, they are going to be hosting the program again this summer. And even if because of COVID-19, they can't host it themselves, they'll still be having it online, even if we can't make it to American University in DC.
Yeah, we both had an amazing opportunity and we highly recommend it. We met a lot of really amazing and interesting people, and it's highly encouraged. Um, yeah. So do you want to maybe start off and give some of your opinions um, on the virus and what it's like in your community?
Well, in my own community, we've now been pretty much under like house arrest pretty much for like the past 3 weeks. You don't
Mhm.
leave your house unless you have to. And I think that's what it's really become across the country. So I think we're like a lot of different areas where we're just supposed to stay in our homes.
Yeah, for me too. There's like been a lot of people that have been like walking around my neighborhood and stuff, but like really beyond that, there isn't much like driving around and like going about your daily activities because we're all trying to just stay healthy, and try to help out as best as we can. I thought I would share some like recent statistics. So the current amount of deaths in the U.S. is at 300,087 cases and 8,158 deaths. And New York, where I live, is it's the most populous in terms of cases and deaths at a total of 113,806 cases and 3,565 deaths. So just to give you like kind of a scope, uh, China was around like the same amount of deaths in like US, and like they had, but I believe that they had like a lot more cases. So like just to like show like how China had handled it is kind of a little bit better than how the US is handling it. And hopefully we get to like a point in time where a lot of people start to become more serious about this whole epidemic and pandemic, and we can get those numbers flipping. Um,
Thought a lot of those numbers were really good. So to kind of
yeah.
explain where they're kind of going with it, one
Mhm.
thing I found really interesting is coming from where we both are, New York
Yeah.
and Indiana. It's really interesting because I was reading how in New York, how it is the highest, they have like a 35% test positive rate. So
Yeah.
where I live in Indiana, we have a 15% test positive rate. But actually, Deborah Birx, who works in the White House, said that I'm supposed to be expecting where I live the next hotspot for Corona. So
Mhm.
seeing as you live in like the current like really big hotspot, what would you really recommend?
I would recommend, of course, like staying at home as much as possible. You know, the majority of the cases are in the city, so I live like around 30 minutes outside, but I have a lot of like peers and family that live there, and they're all just staying home. I would also recommend a lot of like washing your hands, just keeping them clean. If you need to leave the house, I recommend wearing a mask, maybe even some gloves if you're going to be touching some stuff while you're out. But the biggest thing was just to remain social distancing, and stay home as much as possible.
So when you bring up like the gloves and the mask and everything, I know yesterday President Trump talked about how it's now recommended for anyone leaving their homes to wear the masks.
Mhm.
What is probably going to be happening in our country considering that even healthcare workers don't have enough? What's going to happen probably to the rest of us in Europe?
Um, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and recently my friend actually just like sent over some gloves from, she lives in China, and she sent my family and I like a package of gloves. And then I actually want to like donate a bunch of them because I feel like a lot of us are like selfish in our own ways, and we want to like protect ourselves, and we don't really keep in mind how like endangered the medical industry is, and all of the doctors and nurses and other like hospital staff are putting themselves in. Um, and so in terms of like the future, I'm thinking that like if we don't like take more measures to try and help out those medical professionals as much as possible, it's only going to lead to even more deaths, and then we're going to be in even a more threatening situations because then we don't have people that are able to help us. So that's what I'm thinking about. What about you?
I'm really not sure. I honestly think there aren't a lot of reasons for us to even leave our homes in the first place.
Yeah.
That we shouldn't have to hoard a bunch of products like masks and gloves in our home.
Hmm.
Need to, I think everyone should at least have some supplies ready in case there's an emergency.
Yeah.
Something where if people make sure in themselves, just keep a few in your house for emergencies, but don't unless you have to. And I
Right.
think it can exacerbate the problem too much then.
Yeah. I agree with that. Um, Yeah, so like, and then one thing that like has kind of wreaked havoc over like all kids in the United States is this like online education protocol. And I was reading and I saw that over 290 million students have been disrupted worldwide by COVID-19. So obviously there's a huge chunk of that's taken place in the US. So I was actually wondering what your like thoughts are about your school's online education, and how you're kind of handling it in general.
Well, I think it's absolutely better than nothing because I was having an argument about this with someone a couple weeks ago and they said, don't take kids out of school, they're asymptomatic. But then I'm
Mm,
also thinking about the fact that there are a lot of kids at pretty much every school who won't be able to tolerate it if they have the virus.
right.
That the thing to do was pull us out of schools, but
Mm,
go back in the summer or have to redo the year. That I think this was the best option put before us because during like a UNICEF webinar a couple days ago, they explained that there are 420 million kids affected by nationwide school closures. So
mm,
people who are like attending United States-based programs from around the world, and within our own nation itself, there are 54.8 million students affected directly.
mm.
I think the way that we have e-learning is the best option that we have because what else can we really do that's better?
Right.
What do you think?
I'm actually like in perfect alignment with you. At first, it was kind of hard for me to like think of like, as a senior, it's like kind of my whole senior year is ending. I'm not gonna be able to spend time with my friends and like kind of have those like senior year high school moments. But like the more like I think about it, I'm happy that my school has been able to institute such a program that's able to like benefit all of its students to the best of its abilities and keep us safe at the same time. Um, so those are my thoughts.
Yeah, someone brought up something really good in the comments where they talked about people coming
Yeah,
home to vulnerable members. So, like, even though their kids were immunocompromised, they also bring it home since they're asymptomatic and their parents don't know they have it, their family
right.
doesn't. And so
Yeah,
it's spread much that I think a lot of the people who disagree with what we're talking about, what else can we do? It's better
yeah,
to not put everyone else at risk either.
yeah. My school, like when we first closed, my school sent an email that I was like very disturbed by so we had closed for 2 days and then it was the weekend and they had planned for us to go back on like the following Monday. And they were saying how we're not planning to close the school because in the future because all of our students we see are going out to friends' house and whatnot, when it was really only a really small percentage of the kids in my school that were going out. And they were saying we wouldn't even be closing the schools if like a parent of a child had it. It only had to like the only way that they would close the school is if a student had it or a faculty member had it. And I was just really disturbed by that because like what if like a relative gets the virus and then like they're interacting with one another and then they come to school and they don't know that they have the virus. So that was obviously we've been closed for 3 weeks, so that perception obviously changed. But that was something that I know that myself and a lot of other students and parents fought back with the school about.
I think
So
that's such a good point because I remember when the CDC first published like their whole idea for what we should be doing to combat it when they first came up with the concept of like social distancing,
mm,
talking about how like social distancing doesn't work if kids are still going out to hang out with their friends, but
right,
in my own community, such as myself, I'm not leaving my house. But if I'm
Yeah.
forced to come to school, then kids who are interacting are putting me at risk and others at risk. So even
Yeah.
if my peers decide to go somewhere and like put themselves at risk, now I don't have to risk myself.
Yeah. I agree with that. I was talking to my mom who's like actually on this call right now. But I was telling her how like it real like when before my school had closed, like I never thought it made any sense that like it would stay open because like yeah, there are going to be kids that are leaving their houses and doing these things against like what the school recommends us to do. But that's so much different from like hoarding like 1,000 kids into a building and causing to sit with 20 other kids in a class for 40 minutes and then be shoved into hallways in between classes. So I just, I'm happy that the school's closed and I'm happy that everyone's staying home. And I think it's like the best way to like, get this disease moving along and eradicated.
So when you talk about how it's like eradicated, you mentioned your friend in China
Yeah.
and a publishing I think from Forbes 2 days ago talked about how for the first time China's starting to trend down. So
Hmm.
you say their response measures are different from ours if you know anything about that for us to implement ourselves.
Yeah, I know that I don't really know much about a lot of the policy that they like put over there, but I know that when it came to like going outside and stuff, they were a lot more like protective in terms of like wearing masks and stuff. A lot of people here, I feel like they don't ever think they're going to get it, so they don't really take any measures to protect themselves, but every person over there like would go outside thinking like I have to protect myself from getting it. So they would always be wearing masks. They would always be wearing gloves. They would layer up on clothes when they would get home. They wouldn't even like step into their house with the same clothes on. They would like leave clothes in the hallway because a lot of like my friends from like a very like she's from like an urban setting, so they all live in like apartment buildings. So they would leave clothes outside their apartments, and then those would be like their home clothes. So they would wear those when they were home, and then they'd put like different clothes on to go outside. But they would never be in the home with the same clothes that they wore outside. So I think that they just had a lot more safety measures in place to protect themselves and like the people around them. Um, so yeah, I mean, I actually interviewed her, and like you guys can go check that on the AMP Global Youth page, and she like was talking about how a lot of um, a lot of people she's seen from like a lot of people in like the U.S. don't really um, do anything to protect themselves. All they do is like stay home. And like she's seen that a lot of people, and I've seen too that like a lot of people like the social distancing thing. And that was actually like one thing that she highly recommended was that like social distance um and that you wear the mask. So like coming like having those two things coming from like a girl who's like seen it already and coming from a country that already is like nearly finished with it, I think we should like follow that advice. Yeah. Um, I was looking more into like the COVID-19's effect on like the economy. Have you been like looking into that a little bit? What are your
Yeah.
like thoughts and opinions about that?
Well, one of the
Like,
big
what do you
things
think will happen in the future?
so one of the biggest things that I noticed with the economy was, of course, there's the stock market, but I think a lot of that's just based in consumer confidence. But I'd say the
Yeah.
bigger deal is more about unemployment because Forbes published on March 31st that they're expecting that unemployment rates could reach more than 30% because in the past
Wow.
2 weeks, 10 million Americans have applied for unemployment aid. So when
Mm-hmm.
people who have already been put out of a job. My question is, how are they ever going to come back? Because a lot of
Right.
them are small businesses that find the need now to shut down, that it's going to take a lot of money to bring themselves back.
Yeah, that's like definitely something that like I've seen as well, and like I feel I feel really bad for a bunch of those people that own small businesses because I feel like that's like going to be the hardest place to come out of. Large corporations always have like their budgeting, and a lot of them like receive like government funds and stuff for certain projects, so they don't necessarily have to worry about like all of their plans going to waste. But I feel that for small businesses, it's going to be definitely a lot harder to like get back on their feet whenever this is over and kind of like ensure for like their employees and stuff like that and like other personnel going to have a job to come back to in the future because I feel that in the end of this there are going to be a lot of uh, that do end up like closing and shutting down. Fortunate, but it's just because because of a lack of funds and like produce their stores open and stuff like that. Um, I was reading and they were talking about how like the biggest industry that's like going to like lose from like be disrupted in a sense from like the COVID-19 outbreak is like the hotel and like flight industries because they're like now obviously no one's traveling, so airlines are closing and hotels are closing because all of these like people are staying home, so there's need to like have hotels opened. But then I was thinking about how we can use hotels to like our advantage. And I remember when me and Cynthia were talking the other day, and she brought up how like hotels across the country are like starting to take in a bunch of homeless people. So I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit more about that.
Well, so a big thing that this is pretty big in Europe especially, where some
Mm-hmm.
hotels are starting to take in homeless people because of the fact that they're so close to each other and social distancing essentially doesn't exist on the street. So they're bringing
Mm-hmm.
them in they can socially distance to make sure that they're safe. And I think it's somewhere I don't remember where, but we talked about it where they turn like abandoned parking lots,
Yeah, Las Vegas.
yeah, into like 6 foot squares so they can like socially distance themselves.
Yeah.
But one thing I was thinking about was I kind of have an opposite prediction for following COVID-19. I think that the hotels and the flight industry will make a really big comeback based
Yeah.
on the fact that I was kind of thinking about how, like, after wars, like the baby boomers, like, people come back and they're so happy. I also kind of feel like following the COVID-19 outbreak, once everyone knows everything's kind of safe, I think that's going to push like a big rush for
Mm-hmm.
people to go on vacation and stuff
Yeah.
that I think it is going to make a kind of quick comeback compared to food industries. Like I
Yeah.
think food industries are more on like a progressive downfall where they're not just all getting shut down at the same time, but like the hotel and like flight industry just kind of got shut down. But
Yeah.
when we come back, they at least have enough monetary support to make a quick comeback where I feel like diners and like food industries they won't have the economic means to make a quick comeback.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely interesting to think about those that like businesses around the world are gonna like be coming back. Hopefully in a short amount of times in the way that their business will continue to progress in the future. Um, One thing that I also had read about was like a bunch of like mental health studies. So now that a lot of kids are staying home, there's like kind of like an inflation in it, for like a lack of a better term, of ADHD cases. So like a lot of kids that are like that have ADHD like kind of are going a little bit like off like the rails for lack of a better term. So I was wondering if you had read anything about that,
Hmm.
or maybe can like
So
voice
part
an
of
opinion on what I just said.
yeah, so I attended a UNICEF webinar a couple days ago where they talked a little bit about the secondary impacts of COVID-19 specifically on children. And one of the big
Hmm.
things they found was like there's so much more trauma that they need psychological support. So one of the most
Yeah.
recent spending bills passed by Congress has included support for other organizations such as UNICEF, which are working to combat not only like producing vaccines, but also providing for like the secondary impacts of COVID-19. But I think it's so hard to actually administer them because of social distancing, because so many
Right.
places are shut down. Like they started to urge that unnecessary surgeries should not
Yeah.
place during this time. So if it's not deemed as necessary, they can't really do anything about it.
Hmm.
The thing I wanted to bring up with you related to that was they also brought up that there's a higher risk of abuse, especially at home, because
Yeah.
domestic violence, and they're seeing like a surge in like online violence because of like cyberbullying and things such as
Yeah.
these. So how do you feel about those to combat
Yeah,
that?
I've read like a couple of articles now related to like domestic violence at home and stuff and how like there's like they've started to see more cases of it. And it's definitely something that's so tragic and of course that we don't wish upon anyone. I was reading one article that was talking about how a lot of kids were like really upset when their school closed because that was kind of like a safe haven for them. You know, they were getting abused at home and like school was the one place that they could go to that they could like be themselves and weren't afraid that they would be abused or whatnot. Um, so it's definitely sad to see that they're being stuck at home with these people who essentially don't love them and don't really pay attention to them. And I'm hoping that services can be launched to like kind of help these kids for the time being.
See, I think that's what's so sad about
Um,
it because now it's like the federal and state governments have to like weigh the two. Like, is it better to
yeah,
keep people from going to help them to keep them safe from COVID-19 or put them at risk but save these children in abusive homes? It's kind of hard
yeah,
to make the choose between the two because either way you kind of look like a villain.
yeah. It's definitely a hard choice, and I hope that they just come up with something that like kind of compromises the two. Um, yeah, and it's definitely something that's very hard to talk about. And like, of course, me and you don't have like the necessary experience to be talking about this on like a huge level, but I feel like what we're doing, kind of like bringing it to other people's attentions and whatnot, definitely helps.
Yeah. Of kids who were receiving food from their own schools themselves. So I know in my own community we've had 6 schools in the region open up where they're doing boxed meals where you can drive in and they'll give you 2 meals in one box, and it's breakfast and lunch, and you can come and pick it up anytime during the day whenever you're available. And I thought that was really helpful in my community, but a lot of places just don't have them. So I was wondering, what if there was something that kind of mandated or required them to provide aid such as this? So it'd be great if there was some sort of aid or some sort of like mandate requiring them to provide food or some sort of aid to make sure that the government themselves can provide some sort of assistance, or if at least one business in every local area was providing something because there's so many kids affected. Just any sort of solution.
Yeah, so like in the town over from mine, one of the a county legislator that like covers the district of Syosset, which is just a town over from mine, he actually sponsored like a food drive event. Unfortunately, I don't think it received the amount of uh, attention that it deserved, being the cause, but because so many people were staying home, it just didn't receive the attention that we had hoped for. But I know that I interned for him in the fall, in the past fall, and he's definitely someone that is very proactive about, reaching out and helping those people that have limited access to food, and other essentials. So I think that if there were more things like that, to get the community involved in helping others, that would be really good. And it's like unfortunate that that hasn't really happened already.
So
Um,
kind of, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
So just kind of like, if shifting this a little bit, what do you think are going to be sort of the long-term effects, and what are the lessons that you think we'll probably learn from this situation?
Yeah, so one lesson I think we're gonna learn is to obviously be like a lot more clean. I know that like within my own household, we're like kind of like paranoid freaks about it. Like we're always like washing our hands, we're always like cleaning surfaces, and I think that like it's gonna teach us that we need to like when we go somewhere, we need to wash our hands. Like because a lot of people like honestly like they don't like wash their hands when they're at a restaurant or whatnot. And I think that like this is going to teach them that they need to be doing those like little simple things in order to like keep themselves and like the people around them clean. In terms of long term effects, um, it's really hard to say. I think it's of course, I think that everything is going to go back to normal at some point. I just don't really know when because we don't know how much longer this is going to go on for. Like, there's no like going to end in a month from now. Like, as much as I would want it to end, like even within less than a month. Like, um, so I mean, the worse it gets, and the amount of time it needs to prolong itself, the worse I think things are going to get, and the harder it's going to be for us to like get back on our feet. But I definitely think that right now it's heading in like a downhill direction, which is why I think a lot of us need to become more proactive about helping get things back on track. What about you?
I think two big lessons that we're going to learn is, or rather not lessons, but two ways it's going to help us,
Hmm.
is the first one being that it's going to make e-learning more of a commonality,
Hmm.
because we tested e-learning in my school 4 years ago,
Mm,
but we decided that it wasn't going to work, and then we never did it. So we 1 year after that, we had like an entire week off from school and then go and make it up at the end of the year. But
mm,
other schools all around like our region had been using e-learning. But I think following this, now that we have an actual plan in place, if we ever have school canceled again, I think we're gonna opt for e-learning rather than making up a day later. And I think another thing it's gonna push is more of delivery services,
mm.
because up to this point, my family and many others had never had groceries or anything delivered to their home before. So, like, sure, there had been like the big pop up of like Uber Eats and Postmates and everything, but those are like from restaurants. So, I think now we're
Yeah.
gonna see more people like their groceries delivered and everything afterwards because they're gonna realize it's so accessible and so easy that I see like a new trend that kind of shows up and continues to stay in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. My family personally has like done like grocery delivery to our home before, just for, a convenience perspective. But I think that like now it's definitely becoming more popular, and I think that like this, although the opportunity, like the circumstances of the opportunity are unfortunate, it's definitely giving way to big businesses like that and allowing them to grow. Benefit to this whole coronavirus situation, but obviously we would rather have this benefit in a different circumstance. Um, so yeah, we were wondering if any of our viewers have any questions for us. We'd be more than glad to answer. So let us know. Um, One thing I was actually just reading about today was like going back to like the sorry, not mental health, medicine and stuff like that. Um, in terms of medication, a lot of people that take like daily medication are now being restricted in the amount of pills that they can take from the pharmacy and whatnot. So I was wondering.
I think when it comes to pharmacies, I think they're going to continue to exist as much as possible. But I think one thing that becomes kind of weird is what's considered like essential and non-essential. So, like, for example, Meyer, sure, their pharmacy isn't open 24/7, but they still have like the general medical area open 24/7. But Meyer isn't open the entire day anymore. Like, they're shutting down more. So, it's like in the middle of the night, if you need something immediately,
Mm,
then that can be something where people are suffering more. But I, other than that, the pharmacy is always going to continue to exist as something that's necessary. So I
yeah.
don't think it's going to change much. How about you?
Yeah, so like my brother's girlfriend is actually, her sister has like an immunodeficiency and she needs to take medication for it. Um, and they were she his girlfriend was telling me how like her parents are like freaking out now because they able to get her the amount of medication that they need and they're able to give her pills for like the next like 3 to 4 weeks or so, and that now her whole family's like freaking out. Oh, like what if we can't get the pharmacy to give us more because we're still stuck in quarantine? Um, so I think in the sense of like people needing certain medication that now can't be given to them to the extent that they need is a little bit scary. You know what I'm saying?
I, yeah, I read something about that, and they said like a lot of places are facing these shortages that what you should be doing is calling in
Yeah.
like well ahead of time. So that way they'll like if they get something in the future, they'll be able to hold on to it, but it's not like you're calling in the day before and they're like, we don't have it anymore. At least this way they'll kind of be predicting it and expecting it. So I think that's something
Mm.
that a lot of people should keep in mind because it used to be so easy to just later today more. So being cognizant of that and making sure that you're proactive. And while it's not their fault, there are certain changes that we need to make. And it sucks, but saying, okay, 4 weeks from now, I'll need this, so I guess I need to call ahead of time. Like, you think e-learning is going to be more accessible in the future?
Okay, yeah. So e-learning is going to be more accessible, and in terms of like the education, like for the rest of this year, I don't think that like any of the material that kids should be learning will be diminished, because it's essentially the same thing. We're just not in like a school environment. So I don't really think for the future much is going to change in terms of education. It might just, going back to like, no, not going back. I don't know what I'm saying. Thinking about like student involvement. I think that that might be difficult more like in terms of like captivating the student. That's the only thing that I'm a little bit worried about. Ori 37. No, I don't think that they will be behind for next year. Um, Jericho is taking a lot of like proactive measures to make sure that their kids are on track for next year. So I think that they'll all be fine.
I know in Florida they told parents if you feel like you want your student to redo the year,
Hmm.
like sign them up to redo that same year again.
Oh wow, that's great.
So in effect, like if that happens and your parents like want you to, I think that'll be an option. But I don't think they're necessarily gonna be like on paper they won't be behind. Like they'll have technically gone through like content and everything.
Hmm.
But despite that, I think students themselves, like I know there's a lot of studies that have been published saying that e-learning doesn't exactly provide the same quality of education. So I think on paper they'll click off all the like boxes saying that they taught us stuff, but I don't know if necessarily we will have learned the best.
Yeah,
But
yeah. One thing I've been considering is how like this year, like the knowledge that we like get from this year will like affect the students like learning and like abilities and knowledge in like the coming year, because I know that in a bunch of schools, like certain classes you take one year are prerequisites for the next year. So I'm wondering how like not learning all of the information that's supposed to come with a course in one year will affect the student's ability to learn and focus in class in the following year. So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
so I was thinking about that too, and thinking about how even though they're having the AP exam and they said they're cutting essentially the last quarter, and most colleges said they'll still take the credit for the AP exam. But now I'm wondering if you use that classes in college and you're going on to the next one, will you know everything that you need to know in order to do well in the next level class?
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely like a food for thought. And I think that, as schools plan for the next school year, is something that they're definitely gonna take into consideration. Hopefully, College Board will work with them as best as possible to make sure that their kids are, going to be able to take exams and focus enough in class to the best of their abilities.
I know
Um,
that we brought up when we were talking earlier about how some colleges are saying they need like SAT and ACT scores for next year. So
mhm.
I was wondering, do you think that's something they're going to keep in the future? Like they'll notice that they can still find quality students without these exams, that more colleges will not require them anymore into the future?
Yeah, so I've actually read a bunch of articles on how a lot of schools are starting to push away from SAT and ACT exams. Um, I've read uh, I read one article that said that even a few schools next year won't necessarily need your SAT or ACT score in your application, and a lot of schools right now are actually test optional. Um, there's a whole like a lot of kids are like they're afraid to like not submit their scores because then they're like gonna think like, oh, what are you hiding, like was your score that bad? But I think that's just like the first step into like going all the way from the ACT SAT testing in general. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that a lot of schools will move like away in the future from the SAT and ACT policy.
Does comments have any questions before we wrap it up?
Yeah.
Seeing none, I think one thing we'll just reiterate again is so for anyone who wasn't here when we started, I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Dylan.
And both of us in 2019 attended the Global Scholar Program by AMP in Washington, D.C. It was a great opportunity, and now we're interning with the program. And if you found this interesting, if you like learning about international relations, what goes along with it, we got the opportunity to talk to like individual organizations and different people while we were in DC. So if you're interested in it, you can definitely still join this year. And even if because of COVID-19 can't make it to Washington, D.C., there will still definitely be an online program. So make sure to check it out.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.